So, hi, this is Michelle, and this is the next episode of Not a Standard. Before I introduce my guest, I want to say that today's episode is personal to me. Not sure who knows this, but when I was 5 years old, my brother was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and it completely changed our life as a family. It was scary, it was hard, and I honestly feel like it's one of those diagnoses that isn't quite understood by many, but should, as I believe that it could truly save a life. So, with that being said, I'd like to introduce my guest for this podcast. Her name is Jillian, and many may know her by her Instagram, Type 1 Diabetic Chick. She's an excellent speaker, a teacher, a wife, and she's also someone who deals with type 1 diabetes every single day, but continues to find life beyond it, which is something I really respect about her. So without further ado, I'd like to officially welcome Jillian to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited about this one.
I know, I love the connection. I love finding those little connections in life with people, especially when it comes to diabetes. So
yeah, super important. So if you're okay with it, I'd like to just dive right into my questions.
Of
I just
course.
know everyone's curious. So can you tell us a little bit about your story and when you were diagnosed with type 1?
Sure. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 8 years old. I was diagnosed 1 year after my younger brother was diagnosed with type 1. So our life forever changed, and diabetes is all we've ever really known. And also remember, it's so hard to remember life before diabetes. But so when my brother was diagnosed, he was 7 years old, and he actually was rushed to the ER because he passed out. And my mom rushed him to the hospital, and they were doing all these tests on him, and they kept saying "Oh, it's the flu. Oh, it's this." And my mom goes, "No, it's not any of these things. Figure it out." And they came back, and they're like, "Oh, your son has type 1 diabetes," and he was 5 minutes away from basically passing away because his blood sugar was unreadable. He was in DKA, which is diabetic ketoacidosis, and his entire body was shutting down. So he was, so that's when he was diagnosed with type 1. And then a year later, I was showing similar symptoms like he did. But there's just at that time in the 90s, there wasn't really any diabetes resources. There wasn't really, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have just kind of that online platform where there was all these resources. So there was very little knowledge a little bit with, I feel type 1 at that time. But yeah, so when I was diagnosed, I don't think I was quite in DKA. But when I was 8, I was wetting the bed a little bit because I was drinking so much water because my body needed this insulin that nobody realized. So after wetting the bed, drinking a lot of water, feeling really lethargic, my parents brought me in to get tested. And then I was in the hospital for a few days after that and diagnosed with type 1. So yeah, it's just it's so crazy, looking back and realizing wow, I blinked and it's been 28 years living with type 1 diabetes. So it's been a ride.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I feel like it's so hard when you don't have family members that struggle with type 1 diabetes. I'm assuming your parents didn't have type 1 diabetes, so they had no idea what the symptoms were or the signs of it.
Yeah, we don't have any family history of type 1 or type 2 in my family. There wasn't even gestational diabetes during any pregnancies ever. So yeah, my brother and I were kind of the random two that live with type 1. And at the time, we had a step cousin, which was no blood relation whatsoever. Mm-hmm. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in between my brother and I. So there was the three of us, very similar ages that were diagnosed within 3 years. So it was kind of crazy. And at that time, like I said, there was just no resources out there. There was no awareness. There was no advocacy, I feel really, until we became involved with the JDRF walks and, mm-hmm. and that kind of thing. But we were the only two diabetics in a New York public school. We were the only two diabetics at the time. I think by the time I got to high school, there was one other, and he was a year or two older than I was, so we never really connected. But yeah, it was just crazy at that time, just kind of, I guess, surviving and barely surviving because nobody really knew how to, I guess, live life with type 1 diabetes. The technology, there wasn't really any technology at that time. Mm-hmm. We didn't have insulin pumps. We didn't have continued glucose monitors. And even like, like right now we have like, there's like the new InPen. So it's like a smart pen for injections. So we didn't have that. And we were mixing different insulins together and having to, prick our finger multiple times a day. And you needed like this gigantic drop of blood for it to even like measure, because otherwise you would get an error and have to like redo it. So yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, I feel like so much has changed since my brother was diagnosed, and just like you said, like the awareness of it, and we did
Yeah.
the whole JDRF thing as well, and that was a great like form of support for him. But I also know, like in his life, like he went through a stage of denial where he didn't want to have type 1 diabetes, so he just didn't want to test his numbers in front of people. And I'm just curious, as somebody who has been diagnosed from an
Yeah.
early age, did you struggle with denial? Like, did you go through
A
this kind of stage?
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like my entire teens and early adult years, it was just all a struggle. It was living in denial, hating type 1, hated to be different. Yeah, so my A1C, I think, like probably a little bit about it.
Yeah.
But my A1C, it's tested every 3 months. It's your average of your blood sugars. And there were times where my A1C was like 15%, 16%, which is like just like basically high blood sugars the
Yeah.
entire time, and just being very like inconsistent with blood sugars. Yeah, so yeah, I put myself because I did it to myself. I knew better, especially, being, a college student, even after that. I put myself into DKA a couple times because my body wasn't getting enough insulin. And there were times where I just felt like everything was just shutting down. And there was a time where my brother actually brought me. I said, "Hey, Joe, like something's not right. I need to go to the hospital. I don't feel well." And they're like, "Hey, you have to be here for a couple of days because you're in TKA." And
Hmm.
when you I feel like when you're growing up and you don't have a support system, even though my brother was a type 1, I feel like it's different. Like we didn't have anyone else. I didn't have like a divestie at the time. And I just felt like I was so alone, even though I had my brother to do it with me. And I think that's like a part of it. You have like lack of education. I didn't have a support group at the time. I didn't have like people to connect with, and I just felt like diabetes was such a burden. And it's like sad looking back. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe like that was once me. But yeah, after that last time I was in DKA, and just to like give an example for those who don't really fully understand it, you're basically a fish out of water. Like think about like a little fish just flopping around needing water, right? I needed insulin and I wasn't getting it for so long. And your body's just slowly shutting down, and it's just a horrible feeling. And after that, I kind of this light switch went off, and I was like, I need to change my life. I want to survive. I love life. I love traveling. I love doing things. Like, why am I letting my disease kind of like run my life? I need to be in charge of my diabetes, not have diabetes in charge of like my life, so to speak. So yeah, after like really just like connecting with my endocrinologist, turning to social media, that's when I found the diabetes online community. And that's when I feel like my life kind of changed a little bit, and opened my eyes to realize, hey, I'm not alone. There's people just like me out there, that are kind of like dealing with the highs and lows of diabetes. And I want to be part of this community and do better for myself, and hopefully to be an example to others one day. So yeah, so I got my A1C. Now this is a course of years, so it's not like this overnight this overnight thing, but it took me
That's what I was
quite a
just
few
gonna ask
years.
you.
Yeah, no, I like to be very very transparent about that, because diabetes is a process. Every like couple years, like your body changes from like a kid to a teenager to an adult, and your body is going to change with like how much insulin you need, and just like everything. So you're kind of like relearning your body a little bit throughout like the different stages in life and what you're going through. But over the course of like quite a few years, I was able to, from when I was like a college student with an A1C of 15, now I'm 35, but in my mid 20s, I was able to get my A1C down to an 8. And then over the next couple years, I got on the Dexcom, and then I got on a new insulin pump. I was on the Omnipod. I started with Medtronic, then Omnipod, and now Tandem. And now my A1C is a consistent between 5.6 and 6.1%, which is like
Wow.
really awesome when you look back and you're like, wow, I can't believe, you know, I was like here and now I'm like
Hmm.
in this like healthy range and living my best life right now. But it is a process. And I think like one of the biggest lessons with diabetes is just being patient with yourself and patient with diabetes and just staying, optimistic and reaching out if you need help and being able to, connect to other people in the community and be able to get the resources that you need. I think all of that together is like almost the key to success with thriving with type 1. So
Yeah, and I feel like you are thriving. You just got married, you're going to concerts, you're going hiking, you're doing all of this like amazing stuff. And I'm like, whoa, like she's awesome. Like she's exactly what I want for like not a standard. Just like living beyond like the diabetes. It's pretty awesome. So like I
yeah,
just have
it's
to
like
ask
wild.
like, yeah. So like what helps you like manage them now? Like do you have any like habits or routines or like what tricks have you learned essentially with
So
diabetes?
I always, when people ask, like, how do you have let's say an average of a 6% A1C? Like, how do you do
Hmm.
it? And I like to be very honest. I am not a low carb person. I don't follow a specific diet. I, I try to make, I try to just do everything in like moderation and balance. So, can
Hmm.
I have an Oreo cookie? Of course I can. Type 1 diabetics can have anything that anyone else is able to have, but we just have to monitor it and be able to, have the proper insulin to be able to break down those sugars and those carbs. So I just make sure I am just constantly, trying to pre-bolus as hard as it is sometimes. Just give yourself insulin at least 10 to 15 minutes before you eat. And then if I don't do that, because I don't know, let's just say I'm out and I don't know what I'm going to get or whatnot. I try to make sure I count my carbs like carefully. I put it into my insulin pump. So I'm getting enough insulin. And then I always make sure when my blood sugars are high, I give myself a correction insulin. I don't wait until my blood sugars are just like coasting high. I make sure I kind of like nip it in the bud.
Hmm.
But I have to say, like, all of that is big thanks to technology. Um, I always say if you're able to, um, if your insurance is able, you know, if you're able to get it covered through insurance or financially you're able to do it, I always say technology for me has been like my kind of like my lifesaver.
Hmm.
For other people it's going to vary, right? And you can manage your diabetes with so many different like management styles, but for what works best for me, constantly being busy, constantly just like out and about and loves loves to eat and drink and
Yeah.
just do like whatever. um, I've always been on an insulin pump and CGM as long as I can remember. First came my insulin pump. So I've been, let's see, on an insulin pump since I've been in high school. So that's been like 15 years or so, a
Yeah.
little more than 15. So yeah, I've been on an insulin pump for 15 plus years. And then when Dexcom came out with their CGM, that for me was like a game changer. And then when
Hmm.
Tandem was able to sync with Dexcom and integrate and talk to each other, that for me kind of really put my A1C in like this like really healthy range that I wanted to be in. And yeah, it's kind of nice also having like this pump and this and the CGM connect to each other where it kind of like does a lot of the work for me. So it's kind of like a little like, it's just like one less thing I really have to worry about because, I'm getting the insulin that I need. It gives me a little bit more. It'll cut my insulin back depending on my blood sugar. So I feel like that was, a big game changer for me and my diabetes management, with hitting that target A1C that I kind of wanted to be in.
Yeah, I feel like technology has made everything easier. I know even like going to Disney with my brother when he was on just like the syringes of insulin, it was like horrible. It was a horrible experience because it didn't allow us to
Hard.
be like spontaneous, and he had to pack like the right amount of insulin for the right amount of exercise and food that he was doing. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's just a lot of like math. So technology has made everything so much easier.
Yeah, it's so nice, and especially like the features. I love like I can put my insulin pump into like activity mode to keep my blood sugars a little higher. When I'm sleeping, it'll put me in a different like mode, and it just takes so many like I don't know. It just takes a lot of like the errors out of, you know. I feel like diabetes a little bit. It just kind of it's just improved my life so much. And having just so many diabuddies and community and being able to connect with people and share, my story and hear their stories, and also learn about so much. I feel like, well, no, I did when I got on social media and I was like seeing all these diabetics profiles and the different managements and the different pumps out there and the different CGMs, like it just opened like a whole new world for me, because I was learning everything about technology, everything about advocacy, everything diabetes related online. Like I wasn't learning that at my endo's office. I wasn't learning that, like just like on a TV or anything like that. It just came from patient advocates. And that's when I was just so inspired to be part of that community. And that's when like my passion, I feel like for diabetes advocacy really came in, because I felt like I was able to turn my life around. I want to share the ups and downs of my life with people every single day, the good and the bad, because we all have bad days with diabetes,
Yeah.
and just help others, like help people out there that are struggling, and being able to see like a real person doing like real things, not just this picture perfect world, and being able to, thrive and just kind of live a good life with diabetes.
Yeah, I think you're awesome, and I think what you share is awesome, and just sharing like the
Yeah.
ups and downs and everything. Like it's just awesome seeing somebody just being so real about dealing with diabetes.
Yeah, it's a hard disease to live with. And I'm the first person to say I have really bad days. And those of us, whether you're living with type 1 diabetes for like a couple years or 20 years plus, like I am, diabetes burnout is real. And everyone struggles at one point with diabetes. I feel like I just, I feel like it's very rare to talk to somebody and they're like, oh no, I've never struggled. Like never been in diabetes burnout. And like, yeah, the mental health side of it is just very real. And it's nice now that there's resources out there, and there's actually like diabetic therapists, which are like amazing for people that really want someone to get it and be able to talk about things going on. So yeah, there's just the diabetes community is just such a beautiful thing. And, I encourage everyone out there who's listening, if you're not involved, to like, connect with, whether it's a local JDRF chapter, it could be ADA, or maybe you're advocating for Insulin for All with T1 International and Beyond Type 1. There are so many amazing communities out there. And, having a diet buddy and having that community is just, it can really impact your life.
Yeah. I feel like one of the hardest parts about being type 1 is probably also being misunderstood by a lot of people, too.
Yeah.
Like, I know type 1 diabetics get confused with type 2 diabetics, and a lot of times people tend to share their 2 cents about what you should be eating and what you shouldn't be
I
eating.
know it's so tough. But you know what? I actually found, to be 100% like honest with you, there's all these stigmas out there, and there's all these jokes, and at like one time, you know, I didn't even like, it didn't bother me as much, but the more I've lived with type 1 diabetes and the more jokes out there and the
Mm-hmm.
stigmas, you know, it just kind of like, it makes me feel sad that in 2023,
Yeah.
we're still joking about, you know, diabetes and losing feet and not being able to eat things. And, you know, and the stigma of like, oh, you know, people living with type 1 diabetes are unhealthy and they eat a
Mm-hmm.
lot of junk and they did it to themselves. And we have to like break all those stereotypes, not for just type 1s, but also type 2s. And I feel like type 1s don't really get as stigmatized, but I feel like type 2 diabetics, they get like a lot of, just like a lot of negativity. And it's sad because, you know, they're, like people are always like, oh, it's preventative, it's preventative. Maybe in some cases, but not for all. And I know so many people that live with type 2 diabetes and it wasn't preventative.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like as a community too, you know, I'm in the type 1 community, but online, I feel like we have to be so open and accepting for all diabetes, whether
Yeah.
it's type 1, type 2, gestational. I think there's type 3C out there. There's LADA, there's quite a few, you know, different, what do you call, I don't want to say like branches, but there's, you know,
Yeah.
there's so many different types of diabetes out there. And, you know, if we can band together and support each other and not bash each other and stick up for each other, I think, you know, that will go a long way.
Yeah, I feel like with any kind of struggle, I know even with eating disorders, I feel like they're totally misunderstood a lot of times and made fun of. And it's like there's so much context behind that. Like you have no idea.
There
The
is.
same
Yeah.
thing with type 1 diabetes. So, with that said, like what's something you wish other people knew about type 1 diabetes?
Whew.
Yeah.
There's so much. I don't even know where to begin. I feel like it's such a loaded question. And I know, like, after this podcast, I will totally
Yeah.
be thinking of, like, everything I wish I would have said. But I really, you know, I just hope that listeners out there, whether they live with diabetes or not, you know, I just feel like this goes with, like, everybody, everywhere. I was just teaching the students about this today, but not judging people. And maybe just taking a step back and you know, trying to walk in their shoes for just one day, managing blood sugars, managing insulin. You know, right before this podcast, my blood sugar crashed. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to like eat everything. What if I'm low, like, you know, with Michelle? And then I was like, no, this is part of it. This is real. This is real life. This is what diabetes looks like. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, my insulin pump might beep, my CGM might beep, but that's just part of me. And instead of being judgmental, you know, I rather people ask me like, oh, hey, like, what's that on your arm? Rather than like, you know, people like saying things, you know, behind your back or, you know, the one big thing is like, oh, can you eat that? I mean, I'm 35 years old and I still get asked that. And
Yeah.
it is, I feel like the most offensive thing because you would not ask anyone else in the world if they can eat something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why would you do it to a person living with diabetes? And that's like I said, it's part of like breaking like the whole, like all the stereotypes out there and the stigmas is, you know, I think like showing support or just not saying anything at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I feel like not commenting on people's food is a good idea.
I know. It's like the weird, like what you're commenting, like I have, and then you feel like too, as much as you, like as much as somebody could be so open and so vocal like I am, sometimes I feel like even like when I walk into wherever, I feel like not hiding what I eat and drink, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like there is a little bit of that because I hate being judged. I hate being stigmatized. And I don't also, as much as I'll have conversations with everybody, you know, it's so exhausting all the time to stick up for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, sometimes you just want to be able to like eat in peace and not feel like somebody's like,
Yeah.
oh, she's a diabetic. She shouldn't be eating that. You know, and I just hope that over time we like can break those stereotypes.
Yeah, and the thing is that I can even relate to you, even just coming from like an eating disorder background, like going out with my friends or my family that knows my history is like, okay, like what is she eating? Or like I feel that internally, and even though it might not even be there, sometimes you feel it still.
Yeah,
I
and I
feel
have
like,
families are worse with it. I to this day, like they're like I don't enjoy going out with everybody in my family out to eat.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you should be. Oh, it's like, yeah, I can have a little bit of like sweets if I want to. Like, it's okay.
Yeah. I'll be
I want
okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, as a side note, because I know you were talking about this before, I think it was so, like, awesome that you wore your pump to your wedding, and you were like, screw it, like, if it beeps, and whatever, like, they'll have to deal with it. I thought
Yeah.
that was so cool.
I was that was a big debate for me for a little bit.
Yeah.
Not like too long, but for a little bit, I was watching my just like diet buddies or just like people in the community that I've been following for a while. They're like, oh, I want to be device free for my wedding, and I'm going to go to MDI, which is multiple daily injections for my wedding, so I don't have
Mhm.
any devices on me or anything. And I was like, oh, a couple people are doing that. Should I be doing that? And there was for like for like the short time, I thought I should have been doing that. And then as I was trying on my wedding dresses, and then I found the wedding dress of my dreams, it had pockets in it.
Ooh.
And I was like, nope, like I am wearing my devices because I want to be comfortable. And my comfort is my medical devices. When I don't have one of my medical devices, it's kind of like a piece of me is missing because I'm
Yeah.
always connected to technology. It's just a part of me. It's just a part of who I am now. And I didn't want my day to be ruined with missing an injection or having to poke my blood sugar, like having to poke my finger. But I did want my devices not on my arms for my pictures. That was just something I didn't want. So
Yeah.
not hiding it, but I wore all my medical devices, but it was under my gown, and I was able to like wear everything and go about my like a somewhat normal day and still be connected. And so what I did was I had my seamstress she sewed in for me, and she didn't even charge me because she thought it was like, she was just like, she did it as like a little gift for me, but she sewed in a little pocket for my insulin pump. And then what we did was, this is like so funny. I had my phone in my pocket on my wedding day because it was connected to like, my Dexcom. And then in my other pocket, I had a fruit snack in case my blood sugar was low. I was able to just whip out fruit snacks. And it just like, this is my life. This is my everyday life. And I didn't want it to be different. And I didn't want to like have to sacrifice blood sugars or, maybe missing a shot just because it was like my wedding day.
Yeah.
And that's why my husband married me. He took me for all of me, and he accepts. I always say, like, you accepted all of me with all my beeps at all hours of the night, and he's my biggest supporter. So
yeah, I feel like it's probably hard for a lot of people that are diabetic to believe that there's going to be somebody that's for them that will handle like their diabetes, and I think it's kind of amazing. Yeah, like how did you find Mike?
We met, so we've been together for 6 years, married for almost, this May will be 1. We met just actually organically, which was like wild because, I met before him. I was meeting so many of like my partners through Tinder and like online, dating websites. Cause I feel like that's how you, right? That's how you meet people nowadays. But I actually met him when I was downtown Detroit, helping my friend move in her new apartment. And it was a big apartment building, and that's where I met him. And we were just like together ever since. We went on one date, and it was that date. We were never separate again. But yeah, it's like dating is really hard with diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2, and also the big question of when do you break it to somebody that you have these medical devices attached to you, especially when you're starting to get serious and intimate moments are going to happen. You're like, you don't want it to be. For me, I didn't want it to be like the surprise. I mean, think about it. If somebody had something attached to them, right? You'd be like, oh, hey, okay, it's like a surprise, but not in a bad way. You didn't tell me about it, so it's kind of like a surprise shocker. So I always say, like, be honest when you go on dates with people. Not saying you have to do it on the first date or the first encounter, but I always say, like, early on, like, be honest with the person that you're going to be potentially dating. That like, hey, yeah, I have type 1 diabetes and I have medical devices, and like that's me. Like, you take it or you leave it. And I've been in, I've heard so many stories out there, and I find sometimes, people are like, oh, hey, how do you find like somebody that's so supportive? And you have to go through sometimes quite a few
Yeah.
bad seeds before you kind of like find your Prince Charming. And that's definitely what happened with me with dating. And, but eventually, like, you will find your person who accepts you and all of you. And, no matter what your diagnosis or diagnoses are. So,
Yeah.
just be patient. They're out there.
Yeah, and I would say we all have something. We all have a past. We all have struggles. We all have something. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just choosing your favorite train wreck. I think I saw on a quote,
Yes.
dealing
Yeah,
with it.
exactly. And there'll be quite a few. So,
Yeah. So I just want to use the remaining time of this episode to speak towards those who have either been newly diagnosed or like have had friends or families that have.
yeah.
So kind of like a two-part question, but what advice would you give someone who is type 1 diabetic? And what kind of advice or guidance would you give their family or partners?
So I think this kind of goes with, a person newly diagnosed and also the family. Patience is everything. When you are newly diagnosed, your life forever changed at that moment, and you are relearning your body, and you're relearning what works and what doesn't, and how much insulin you need, and your everything's going to be constantly changing, just all the time. As a newly diagnosed diabetic, sometimes early on you just need a little bit of insulin, and then as the time passes, you're going to need more insulin. And I think patience is just key. It's like anything in life. And like, just be patient with yourself. And the one thing that's really helped me, it took me a long time to figure this out, like 20 years plus, is, after you find your kind of peace and you find acceptance, I feel like that's when life truly begins. It's
Mm-hmm.
weird. You can have this amazing life, right? But like, once you find that acceptance, I just feel like there's like this weight that like lifts off your shoulders. And it kind of clicks. And it's not going to be today, it might not be tomorrow, but it eventually clicks, and like, you'll find your way. And one of my favorite quotes ever, and I think I actually sent this to you earlier, was, I'm not sure who said it, but the quote is, until there is a cure, there's community. And I truly believe that, if you can get involved in your diabetes community and reach out for help and support early on, I feel like the earlier you'll be, you'll find your acceptance with
Mm-hmm.
yourself and be able to like really thrive after that.
Mm-hmm. And what about like their families, would you say?
For families, I like, it's a tough one, but try to limit your judgment, because living with type 1 diabetes is so hard as it is. And where we don't we don't need anyone to make it harder. So if you could just be a support and be there when the person needs you, that will be really helpful to that person living with diabetes.
Yeah, I feel like some families though they want to like police their kids or police
Yeah,
their
or be like a helicopter parent.
yeah.
It's finding that balance, and I think that maybe caregivers early on are kind of like very helicoptery, but hopefully over time, that just kind of like, you can take a step back
Mm-hmm.
and give that person a little space, because when you feel like you're just constantly, you know, under surveillance 24/7,
Mm-hmm.
that's when also like rebellion can happen too. I know my brother and I went through that phase too, where
Yeah.
we were just like, we had like a helicopter mom for a little bit. And then once she kind of like loosened up, it just made our lives, I feel like, so much easier, because we didn't have to worry about just like what's going on in our lives, and then add diabetes to it, and then add everybody else, their comments and the judgment, and the constant reminders. So yeah,
Yeah, and I would say like also remembering that they're more than just their type 1 diabetes or their
yes,
struggle. Like
exactly,
talk to them about other stuff.
exactly.
So I read that you're a type 1 diabetes rock star. So I want to know what supplies and equipment you would recommend for someone that's just starting.
So I have to say, it's a very loaded question because what works for me may not work for possibly a newly diagnosed person with diabetes. Um, you know, you have to sometimes go through multiple different like diabetes management things before you find like the perfect system that works for you. I always recommend that even before an insulin pump, if I could live with like one piece of technology, mine would be a CGM, and it doesn't even matter like what kind of CGM it is. I just say if you could get on a CGM, and you're able to, I think that is like just so helpful because eliminate all those like just pricking your finger all the time because that can burn somebody out like very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to just be when you're able to monitor your blood sugars, like everything else just kind of flows, right? Everything else kind of like works its way out.
Yeah.
But I think a CGM is like I personally can never live without a CGM. Insulin pump, maybe if I had to, right? Like I don't have to, but like if I
Yeah.
had to pick one, I think a CGM definitely is like my end all be all.
Awesome.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes and other times, I've been on three different insulin pumps since I've had diabetes. And each insulin pump, just like CGM, each insulin pump has pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
So what works for me may not be the best for your lifestyle or works for you, but don't give up. I always say, people that try the pump, they're like, oh, it's not for me. Oh, the tubes or even being tubeless, it knocks off. Like, don't go by other people's opinions because it may not work for one person and it may work for you. And just have patience with yourself, with the CGM, with the insulin pump. You might not get it on the first try, the second try, or maybe, you're only giving it 1 to 2 weeks. Give it longer. Give yourself just like time to really, fall into like that technology and find what works for you. Because there's a lot out there. So.
Yeah, and I feel like a major problem though is that so much of this stuff is so expensive. So, like, what would you suggest to somebody that can't afford this stuff or
You
is?
know, it's so tough because in this day and age, when people find out like what insurance really like entails,
Yeah.
it's really scary, especially when you're 26 years old, and it's your 26th birthday and you get kicked off your parents' insurance, and you're like, now what? Like, what do I do if you
Yeah.
don't have your own insurance at the time? And it's really sad because not everyone can afford technology and not everyone can afford, even let's just say insulin that keeps us alive. And
Mm-hmm.
I always say if you could be a patient advocate, like you need to advocate for yourself and you need to advocate for other people living with diabetes. And if you can get involved in these smaller grassroots organizations like T1 International that advocates for insulin for all, that it's just gonna like, I don't know. It's going to make change over time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be today or tomorrow, but it's going to be, everyone's going to make changes together. And right now I know that there's some resources out there. There's not a crazy amount. There are insulin savings cards. Now with everything in life, there's like these stipulations and guidelines,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you were to, let's say you're on an insulin and you can do like, let's just say, I'm going to give you an example. I'm on Novolog. I would Google Novolog savings cards. And a lot of these insulin companies, they give insulin savings cards out there, or there's like another program. Mine is called Novo Cares. So I was not able to get like the $35 insulin with the
Mm-hmm.
savings card. But then there was another program that I was able to do. It was, I pay $99 a month and I get 3 vials of insulin, which is what
Okay.
I need. So there are some resources out there. I know there's also, it's called getinsulin.org. I think Beyond Type 1 kind of like oversees that, and they put some resources out there. And if you ever need help with any insulin or any diabetes supplies, there's Mutual Aid Diabetes, and they are a wonderful organization, and they help people get the insulin and supplies that they need. So definitely, if anyone needs anything, reach out to me and I'll definitely connect
Yeah.
you. But Mutual Aid Diabetes is just like, they're amazing, and T1 International. And they fight for, insulin for all and accessibility as well. So
Awesome. So, is there anything that I forgot in this podcast that you would like to share? Because I feel like that's something that I've been thinking of. Like, how do I make this valuable for somebody with type 1
no,
diabetes?
I think we went over like so much. And yeah, and if anyone has any questions, you can find me on all social media at T1D Chick. So you're more
Awesome.
than welcome to message me. I will answer. I will try to help you as much as I can, to point you in the right direction of resources and whatnot. And I also have a link in my bio with all these insulin resources as well. Getinsulin.org is up there. Insulin savings cards are up there. Yeah, so definitely check there if you need anything, or reach out if you have any questions.
Awesome. So, I just wanted to end this podcast with a post you've shared when your insulin pump malfunctioned a few days ago. You said, when I tell you diabetes can really suck sometimes, it's true. It's these moments when you're really tested, but giving up isn't a choice. Just another day in the life of a type 1 diabetic. And it really stuck out to me because I think it's important to show that in spite of living beyond your diabetes, you still have diabetes. And with that comes both the ebbs and flows. And that just, yeah, just because things may be difficult doesn't mean it's time to give up. And I think that's just like the perfect ending of this podcast.
It is. One of my other favorite quotes is like, oh my God, what is it? Oh my, I'm like drawing a blank right now. I'm like, so like, there, it's, it's along the lines of like, it's a bad moment but not a bad life. And I really like that, because I feel like that could be like anything going on in life, whether you live with type 1 diabetes or live with whatever else.
Just
But
live.
it's only yeah, it's just like, but it's only a bad moment. Like, your blood sugar's only bad for a little bit, right? Your low blood sugar's only low for a little while. But is it a bad life? Is my life like horrible overall because I have low blood sugars or high blood sugars? No. Life still goes on, and you just have to stay positive and rise above, and realize like tomorrow's a new day, and a new day of blood sugars, and a new day of like everything. So
Yeah, I love that. So thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being on this podcast.
thank you for
Just,
having me.
yeah, thank you to everyone listening today. If you found it valuable, please follow Jillian, subscribe to the show, and share it with friends. Until next time, bye.